myself with everything that Senator Mike Gronsall said a few moments ago, and you are warmed up, right? Don't forget, he talked about all the rest of us, the president and me and the rest, that we need to get reelected. Don't forget Mike. Thank you, Mike, for your hard work and for standing tall, and we appreciate it so much. Today I get to introduce someone that does not need an introduction, but I agree with President Obama, the explainer-in-chief is about to come. Somebody said, well, the president talked quite a while, but it always seems like it's 5 minutes. And that's true. You ever go to church and say, my gosh, that was a long sermon. Where you go and it was just right and you didn't hardly know it started. Well, this is the way our President Clinton does for us. He fires us up, he brings us together, he explains, and it seems like it only took 5 minutes. Welcome, President Clinton, right here to Council Bluffs, Iowa. Well, first of all, I'm glad to be here. I was driving in from the airport today, and I was looking at all the time. I said, gosh, I'm getting old. None of this was here the first time I came here. Senator Gronsall, it's great to see you. I wish you well in your election. I hope you all will do everything you can to make sure he stays in the Senate and stays the Senate leader. He is a very good man. I love Leonard Boswell. I always have. And I want to give it's a little bit of unconventional beginning of a political talk this close to the election, but you know, Hillary and I live in New York now, and we've been hit pretty hard by this storm, and our neighbors are in trouble, and you probably saw 80 to 100 homes burned in Queens. There's a barrier island in New Jersey that looks like something in a post-apocalyptic movie. Just everything gone and fires everywhere. My next door neighbor is this wonderful Catholic layman, 70-year-old man who's a pediatric cardiac surgeon and a big supporter of the health care bill that President Obama signed. He and his wife are wonderful people. They lost all the trees in the yard. Just about everybody's out of power. I put in a generator when I came here. I felt like a survivalist, but we at least got a house warmed up. My daughter and son-in-law live in Lower Manhattan. They just got told they don't have any electricity for a month. Wow. And she calls every day to tell me she's okay. They filled up the bathtub with water right before the storm came, so they'd have, you know, at least that. So and here's what I want to say about it. I watched the President and Governor Christie and Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Cuomo, and then I saw a wonderful Governor of Connecticut last night dealing with the horrible floods there. You've probably seen it on television. And here's what I want to say about it. It reminded me that when something like this happens, we know what we ought to know every day. We ought to know that when you get a political job, it's still a job. And when you're dealing with a lot of problems, there's not a Democrat or a Republican way to solve them. You either solve the problem or you don't. And you know that we're all in this together works a lot better than you're on your own. But that's really what this whole election's about. We've got to decide whether we want a you're all in this together country or you're on your own country. Whether we want one more round of trickle-down economics or we want to go back to shared prosperity and shared responsibility. Whether we like all this crazy ideological talk or we'd like to get back to practical problem solving. Whether we want to go back to making budgets based on arithmetic, the way I see it, there's about 3 issues here. One is, who's more likely to restore the middle class with more jobs, rising incomes, and give poor people a chance to work their way into it. Now, I want to have some credibility on this. We had 100 times as many poor people work their way into the middle class, when I was president as in the previous 12 years. Second is, who's going to build a 21st century economy with the jobs of the future and educate and train people to do those jobs? And the third is, are we all going to go together? Are we going to embrace our diversity and say it's a strength? Are we going to keep trying to divide people over these arguments that when it's all said and done won't amount to a hill of beans? Now that's what this election's about. And I keep reading people saying or hearing people saying, oh, they're disappointed in this, that, or the other thing about the president because everything didn't work out perfect. I want to tell you something. I made 40 appearances for then Senator Barack Obama in 2008. And I can tell you that I'm making a lot more this time, and I am way more enthusiastic this time. I was governor of my state for 12 years, and it took me 10 years to turn that economy around, to help the business people and the farmers and everybody restructure the economy. When I ran for president, we ranked first in the country in job growth. But it didn't happen overnight. It was hard work. It's one thing to give a speech, and that's important. It's way more difficult to actually make change. Barack Obama has been making change in this country that is positive. Governor Romney's strategy is to blame him for everything under the sun. Say that, oh yeah, we left him a terrible mess, but he hadn't finished fixing it, so throw him out, put us back in, and I'll give you 12 million jobs because everybody will be so elated that I'm elected. That's what he said, right? Now, I'm sure it's just a coincidence. I want you all to listen to this because most people don't know it. But a few days before Governor Romney made his 12 million jobs promise, 2 business groups having nothing to do with the political parties, Moody's Analytics and Microeconomic Advisors, said that in the next 4 years, the economy will produce 12 million jobs if we don't mess up what President Obama has already done. You got a guy that says, look, I look like a president. I was in business. I've told you I'm going to cut the debt. See me after the elections for the details. And put me in there so I can get credit for what he did. That's basically the whole campaign. Now, I like the arguments for the president better. He inherited the biggest financial crash since the Great Depression. This is the whole election, folks. It hadn't all fixed. There is one important book that was written about this by a Nobel Prize winning economist named Kenneth Rogoff and his co-author Carmen Reinhart. And I think Rogoff's a moderate Republican. And it's basically on financial crises. So he sent it to me, I read it, and I read all the stuff on America Twice, and I called him on the phone. And I said, Ken, how long does it take to get out of something this bad? He said, oh, usually 10 or 11 years. I said, can we beat that? He said, yeah, America's supposed to beat that. We could get out of it in 7 or 8 years. Because we've got lots of energy. We've got all this enormous capacity to generate new jobs out of clean energy, out of the wind, the sun. Because Americans are great entrepreneurs, we could beat that. I said, is there any way anybody who ever held the presidency could have done anything to get us all the way back in 4 years? He said, no way, no how. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, Mr. Romney and the Republicans are all concerned about this debt. They say they are. I saw their convention. They had that debt problem. The worst thing in the world. What they didn't tell you is that we never had a big structural debt before their ideologues took over about 30 years ago and told us that we could eat sugar all day long and never have to go to the dentist. You remember that? Every tax is bad, every tax cut is good, no matter what. And you don't have to pay for it, cuss the government, and claim you're going to do something about it someday. The debt tripled from 1981 to 1989. Then it went up 150% under the first President Bush. It took me 4 years to get rid of the deficit, and then I gave you 4 surplus budgets. That's the Then I left office, they doubled the debt again. They got rid of the pay-as-you-go rule, let you eat the sugar and not go to the dentist. Fought 2 wars and passed a senior drug benefit on the credit card. Then the crash happened. Everybody admits, even Governor Romney, that President Obama didn't have anything to do with the crash. 6 weeks before the election. And what happened? The bottom dropped out of revenues because everybody was worried about going broke and nobody was paying taxes. And we spent more money on unemployment and food stamps and things to support people to keep body and soul together, just like we're going to do after this emergency, just like we always do. It was the right thing to do, but you couldn't help the next one. So the President said, let's spend $800 billion on 3 things. It's his only contribution to this $16 trillion debt, or whatever they say it is. And he said, let's spend it on 3 things. Let's spend 36% of it on giving middle-class people tax cuts so they can buy food and keep the local merchants open and keep body and soul together. Let's spend about 1/3 of it on aid to state and local governments because they can't raise taxes and they can't print money. And we don't want them to lay off all the teachers and the firefighters and the police officers and the nurses. Let's spend 1/3 of it on trying to build an economy that will last, build new jobs, bring back manufacturing, give small businesses tax cuts, 18 tax cuts for small business. And let's make the most of this clean energy movement that is sweeping the world, because we're going to have to do what we can to avert the worst damages of climate change, and we've got to do it in a way that makes money, not loses money. Well, that's what he did. Well, the job losses continued for a year after he took office. But since they stopped, we've had 5.3 million private sector jobs, twice as many as under the previous administration, in the 7 years and 8 months before the meltdown. Before the meltdown. They always complain if we say the Bush administration abandonment of all oversight of the financial institutions has nothing to do with it, so let's forget about it. Won't blame anybody for the meltdown. Won't count it against him, won't count it against Obama. Before the meltdown, they only created half as many private sector jobs as have been created under President Obama's policies in the last 32 months. Housing starts and new car purchases at a 4-year high. Biggest 1-year drop in unemployment since 1995, my 3rd year as president. Some of you weren't alive then. We're coming out of this thing. That's argument 1. Argument 2 is the president's plan for the future is better. The president's plan for the future is to invest more in bringing back manufacturing and modern infrastructure And we're not just talking about roads and bridges here. You want anybody living in rural Iowa to make a living with anybody anywhere else, you've got to have fast computer download speeds. South Korea's speeds are 4 times ours. For not very much money, we can build a network that would allow someone to live on a Native American reservation in the high plains. Someone to live in rural Iowa or rural Arkansas and do business anywhere in the world. It's a big deal. He wants to invest in that. He wants to invest in the education. He wants to invest in the education and training of our young people so they can get those jobs. He wants to invest in training middle-aged people without a college degree who've been unemployed for too long, who need a chance at tomorrow's jobs. They can be given those too. And he wants us to deal with the long-term debt problem, because as the economy grows and these 12 million jobs get produced, then interest rates will go up. Because you have the government borrowing and the private sector borrowing, you can't have that. So he offers a plan based on arithmetic. $4 trillion in debt reduction, $2.50 of spending reductions for every dollar of tax increases. And asking folks like me, who got the benefit of the economic growth of the last decade and the benefit of the tax cuts, to kick in a little, to go back to paying what we were paying when I was president. Because it's nothing but fair, because somebody's got to do it, and we're in the best position to do it, and we're going to be fine regardless, and we'll get the debt down, and keep the interest rates down. Now, what does Governor Romney and his running mate, Mr. Ryan, what do they want to do? They just told us what a terrible problem this was. We're in this huge debt hole, right? So imagine you hire somebody. You got a big hole on your property, and you hire somebody to fill it in. And the first thing they do is jump down in the hole with a shovel and say, well, before I fill it in, I'm going to dig it a little deeper. You would unhire them. But that's what they want to do. They want to have another 20% tax cut across the board. And they admitted, Governor Romney did in the second debate, it was sort of a sliding admission, but he admitted that 60% of these tax cuts are going to go to the wealthiest Americans. We tried that. And then they want to increase defense spending, $2 trillion over a decade, over and above what the Pentagon wants. If you watch the third debate, the President explained that the Pentagon does something all the rest of us ought to do. Every 4 years, they look at their budget from the ground up, and they say, what are the security challenges facing this country? How are we going to meet them? What would they cost? So the Romney position is, I don't care what they decided. I think they need $2 trillion more, and they're going to take it whether they like it or not. It'll keep somebody working somewhere. That's his stimulus plan. Now look, that's $7 trillion more. So then you say, how are you going to fill it? They say, see me about that after the election. We hadn't reduced the debt at all yet, right? How are you going to fill it? Now, to be fair, they have offered one thing that is in President Obama's program. They say the corporate tax rate in America is not competitive with other countries. That is true. But they say the variances are ridiculous. The manufacturer will pay about 35%, and Exxon pays about 17%. So we ought to repeal about $1 trillion worth of exemptions and then cut the rate and keep the revenue straight. You can do that. It matches out. It's in the Obama plan too. That's fine. But the rest of the $6 trillion, see me about that after the election. Now, the truth is, if they're not going to raise anybody's taxes, and they're going to cut taxes, and they're going to give 60% of the cut to the highest earners in America, they have no choice but to negate the whole rest of President Obama's plan. They'll have to cut education. They'll have to cut training. They will have to cut research and development into our future. They will have to cut what we're investing in infrastructure. And cut and cut and cut all these things that will build us a modern economy. And let's just look at Iowa. Because Governor Romney has made some specific suggestions there. He wants to get rid of all the tax credits for wind and solar energy, and keep all the ones for oil and gas and coal. Now, I'm not against keeping the oil and gas ones, but they've been around a long time. And every single study says we are not doing a disproportionate amount for solar and wind. Iowa now generates 20% of its electricity from wind on a good day when all the politicians are talking in the wind. Texas, where they can really talk, is at 25%. You guys are the top 2 states in the country. It's crazy for us to walk away from this. We got 175,000 Americans working in solar and wind today, and they are making above average wages. And they are contributing to the independence of our country, to the growth of the economy, and to fighting the destabilizing impacts of climate change. Iowa's got more 20-foot topsoil than any state in America. The only place that I know of on planet Earth with more is Argentina and Brazil. It is a precious resource. We got 7 billion people in the world now. We're going toward 9 billion. The world will need you. And as a result, Iowa agriculture will do very well for the next 30 years. But we're going to have to be very clever about how we do it. How we conserve our water, how we deal with the chemical challenges that are present when you bring in a crop. We're going to have to be really clever about this. That's why your universities need that research and development money. You cannot afford to have federal funding cut off on the plans of those states for the future. So, Obama's economic program is better. And it's a 21st century version of what I did. You got 22.6 million, 7 million jobs when I was president, 2.6 million when I left, and in just 32 months, the investment strategy and Grow Together strategies produced 5.3 million. This is not a close question. This is not a close question. This would not be an election if people weren't still trying to blame President Obama for the fact that he didn't do what nobody who ever lived on the face of the earth could have done, which is repair this much economic damage. The education plan is better. The race to the top is producing some remarkable results. The plan to educate and train and place 100,000 more science and math teachers is important. We have now every year a demand for 120,000 college graduates in computer science, and the whole country is only graduating 40,000. With unemployment what it is, it's crazy. We just got to redirect more young students into this area. That's poof, 80,000 more jobs right away. Today, Microsoft is trying to hire 6,000 people with computer science background. It's not just that. Non-college educated, long-time unemployed people. The Cleveland Clinic did research into what would happen in the future to healthcare, no matter what happens to the healthcare bill. Where will we need more jobs? And they're publishing them and going after middle-aged, non-college educated, unemployed people and saying, here are 5 things you can get a job at, and here is what it pays. Come here. We'll train you, you will be employed, you will get a job. That's what we should be doing for everybody in America. We're still #1 in the world, or #2 in the percentage of our young people that go to college, but we have fallen to 16th in the world in the percentage of our young adults with 4-year degrees. How'd that happen? You know how it happened. Cost of college went up twice the rate of inflation. People got scared of borrowing the money. They thought they'd never be able to repay it. And the economic crisis made it worse. Family after family after family. So, what did President Obama do about that? He passed the most important college aid program and the most important reform program of his administration, not widely known about. Yeah, they increased college aid, increased the Pell Grants, but the most important thing they did was change the student loan program. The old system, I want you to remember, this election would be over. Leonard Boswell would win. Barack Obama would win in Iowa, in this congressional district, by more than everybody thought, if every young person and every family affected by this knew this one thing. This is one thing you can do in the next week that would change this election. The old system gave money to banks, gave them a fee to run the loan program, and guaranteed 90% of the loan. Right? So you just had to say these students are qualified for student loans. Under the new system, the government sets aside a loan reserve, gives the money to a school, local community college, local university, to go to the qualified students. The interest rates are lower, they're cheaper to repay. I know this. We did this when I was president on an experimental basis. Saved the kids $9 billion who borrowed money. $1,300 on average for every $10,000 they borrowed, they saved. Way more important than that, it says they can pay that money back as a small fixed percentage of their income for up to 20 years. Now think about that. That means that what you have to pay on your loan, no matter how much you borrow, will be determined by your income. It means nobody will ever have to drop out of college again because of the cost. Here's the best thing of all. It saved you $60 billion over 10 years. And since President Obama uses arithmetic to budget, he and Leonard Boswell spent the $60 billion to fund, over that 10 years, increases in the Pell Grants to keep up with inflation and maintenance of the tuition tax credits for middle-class families to help their kids afford college. It is unbelievable. It changed the future. Why don't we know that? Because the program doesn't come into effect fully until next year. And so now there are only, I say only advisably, 970,000 young people already on this income contingent repayment, where they're paying a percentage of their income. It's unbelievable. So what's Governor Romney's position on this? Repeal it. Give the $60 billion back to the banks. Go back to the old system. No longer can you guarantee the increases in Pell Grants. No longer can you guarantee the maintenance of the tuition tax credits for middle-class families. But worse, it will make the cost of student loans higher, it will make them harder to repay, and it will continue to drive down America's world ranking percentage of our young people with college degrees. On this issue alone, Barack Obama should be re-elected president. I'll just briefly say the health care plan's better. Everybody's not. I told you my neighbor, who's a doctor, is for this health reform. My cardiologist, who helped to save my life, is for it. People who've had to live with the old system, all these people that want to repeal it, don't tell you the truth. The worst thing we can do is stay with the status quo. Big headline in USA Today last week, front page, saying that one of the big reasons that middle-class workers didn't get a pay raise in the last decade is that many of them had employers who wanted to give them a pay raise and had to spend all the money paying for insurance premiums. And we know we spend $1 trillion more on health care every year, $1 trillion, that we would not spend if we had any other country system. So this terrible Obamacare, what's it done? Well, because of the requirement, this is really why Mr. Romney wants to repeal it, because of the requirement that 80 to 85% of the money you pay in insurance premiums go to your health care, not profits or promotion, many insurance companies have lowered their premiums, and $1.3 billion in refunds were paid to people in America last year. The bill has all these provisions to encourage people to go from paying for procedure to paying for performance, and reform efforts all over America have led in the last 2 years to health inflation being held at half its former rate, 4% or less. It's the first time in 50 years health costs have increased that little. And 14 to 25 are insured on their parents' policies for the first time. Next year, more than 30 million Americans are going to be able to afford private insurance, not a government program, and they will be insured, many of them with pre-existing conditions. What's the Romney position? Repeal it. The people with pre-existing conditions, even his own staff admits they're not going to be able to cover them, no way, no how. But he says it doesn't matter, nobody dies without health insurance, they just go to the emergency room. Now here's what we know. This is not an opinion, there's like mountains of studies on it. If you depend on the emergency room, you go later, you're sicker, you cost more, you die soon. If you have health insurance, you go sooner, it costs less, you live longer. This is not rocket science. That's why all these other countries are doing better than we are on this, and they got more money to give their people pay raises. Now, he's not done. The most amazing thing, and Leonard's been subject to this attack too, a bunch of hood. Their position with President Obama and Leonard Boswell on Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid, they're actually trying to run to the left of the Democrats. They're saying, those mean old Democrats. Mean. Cut $716 billion out of Medicare. Shame on them. Now what did they do? They took the recommendations of a panel of medical experts supported by the AARP. Romney's position is that the AARP has become senior citizens' worst enemy. Now, I want you to understand, that's the position. See if you believe it. The study says that the budgets for Medicare over the next decade had assumed way too much medical inflation and were subsidizing insurance companies way too much to provide Medicare Advantage coverage. That's where, you know, they give you more preventive services along with regular Medicare. And they say, believe me, 11 to 14% guaranteed profit over and above the regular Medicare was plenty. And with that $716 billion, they closed the donut hole in the drug program. And they helped to fund the necessary subsidies for pre-existing conditions so you can get insurance. But just not spending money means that the money that's going into Medicare will run the trust fund out. If you spend less and we pay the same amount in, Medicare will be stable for 8 more years till 2024. Romney's position is to give the money to the insurance companies, give the $716 back, open the donut hole, let the Medicare trust fund go broke in 2016. All under the guise of helping senior citizens, because the insurance companies will simply not insure them for Medicare Advantage. Here are the facts. This has already been done, by the way, these changes that he wants to reverse. Last year, more insurance companies than ever said, thank you very much, we'll take a guaranteed 14% profit. And asked to participate. 17% more seniors took advantage of the program, and the cost to them of getting in it was reduced, went down by 16%. In other words, what President Obama and Leonard Boswell did strengthened Medicare. It did not undermine it. Romney wants to weaken Medicare to give the money to the insurers, to give nothing more to people on Medicare. And he has painted the AARP as the worst enemy of seniors. It just defies common sense. The only way you explain this is to follow the money. Now, contrast that with Medicaid, where there are no insurers involved. They want to cut Medicaid by 1/3 over the next decade and give it back to you. Now, everybody knows Medicaid takes care of poor kids, right? But most people don't know most of those kids are in working families who can otherwise not afford insurance. And most people don't know a majority of Medicaid does not go to poor children. It goes to 2 other groups. First, seniors on Medicare in nursing homes. Medicaid pays their nursing home bills. When they cut it by a third, the reason they want to give it back to you is they'd rather have the governor of Iowa and Senator Gronstedt decide whether Aunt Mary or Aunt Maudie gets kicked out of the nursing home. We're laughing. This is not funny. And the worst thing of all is, the rest of Medicaid, it goes to children with disabilities, many of them living in families with very solid middle-class incomes. But if you have a child with autistic conditions or cerebral palsy or muscular dystrophy or developmental disabilities of a variety of kinds, they're a blessing from God, but they cost more to care for. And a lot of these families will not even be able to work if you cut Medicaid by a third. How can we do this? How can we give more money to the insurance companies when it's clearly not needed? And then turn around and cut this. Obama's health care policy is better, and reason alone to re-elect him president. I also think he's trying to bring us together with all of our diversity. I agree with what he did, giving those young immigrant kids a chance to stay in this country if they go to college or study in the military. In signing the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. And it's not just a woman's issue. Every man that lives in a family with a working wife is awful glad if she gets paid a fair wage. I agree with what he did in the health care law to guarantee that women could not be charged more than men for the same health insurance coverage. You just have to decide. Obama's economic plan is better, his budget plan is better, his education plan is better, his health care plan is better, his plan to bring America together is better. That is worth standing up for. That is Iowa's future. And you have very specific interests here. The agricultural research necessary to keep your farm economy going and growing is in the balance. The tax credits necessary to keep those windmills coming, a lot of them on the farms of Republican farmers, is in the balance. Whether we continue to search for biofuels that are more and more efficient, that's all in the balance, because that's all gone too. You've got decisions that are personal and larger than that. I urge you, go out and tell people this and bring this election home. Bring it home for Senator Gronstedt. Bring it home for Leonard Boswell. And bring it home